Hi, I'm Lynn Breaux. This is another in the series of French in Vermilion Parish. This evening we have three guests who are from the DesOrmeaux family, whose roots run very deeply in Vermilion Parish. I think on the maternal side of these DesOrmeaux are the Richard and Broussard families. I have here with me on my left Darrell DesOrmeaux, his sister Flossie DesOrmeaux,
How do you do, Wesley?
and John DesOrmeaux. Darrell, Flossie, and John were raised in Lafayette Parish. However, a lot of their weekend time and summertime was spent in Vermilion Parish, and especially in the town of Erath, Louisiana. Darrell, what is the early recollections of the town of Erath as far as perhaps your grandparents that you visited? Could you give us a little?
Yes, the time that I recall as a youngster goes back as far back as about 1940 probably, just before the war started. I was a young kid, about 5 years old then, 4 or 5, and we used to go back to Erath almost every weekend. And in the summertime, we would go there for the summer for maybe 1-2 weeks and stay with an aunt of mine. And we'd go there to pick cotton. I remember we couldn't wait for that, to go and pick cotton, and we'd earn a pound of cotton that we'd pick. We'd get a penny for it. I think we picked cotton all day long for $1. But we enjoyed it. It was fun. It was something that we look forward to every year. And the reason I remember that is because after we picked the cotton all week, or maybe before the end of the week, I don't recall, we used to load them all in a big wagon that my uncle had. He was on the Broussards. It was a Broussard that was an uncle of mine, my grandmother's brother. And we were picking cotton on his land. And we'd load the wagon up, and then 2 big mules would pull us all the way to Erath from about 3 miles outside of Erath, north of Erath, coming back towards Lafayette. But we'd have a good time, good fun, just riding the wagon and playing in the bales of cotton that were in the big old wagon. And they'd bring it to the cotton gin they used to have there in Erath, right in the middle of town, near the railroad track. And I remember that very vividly. And they'd go around to the side and they'd line up with the other mules and wagons that were waiting to have their cotton unloaded from the other farmers in the area. And we couldn't wait till they could get in there and start taking our sacks, so we'd get off and we'd slip off of the wagon, get into the cotton gin, and boy, we'd start going among the bales of cotton, and you had a big ball, playing cowboys and Indians and God knows what else, just being mischievous. But I recall that very distinctly as a kid, among other things like the 4th of July celebrations they had in Erath. That goes way back to as far as I can remember as a little youngster. They had the fairs there and the parades on 4th of July, and I can remember that distinctly. We'd go to Erath for the 4th of July because we had nothing like that here in Lafayette at that time, but Erath had it. So we'd head back to Erath and go there for the 4th of July celebration.
And of course today the 4th of July is probably the largest celebration in Erath every year.
That's correct.
It's as big as Christmas, huh?
It's grown every year, from what I can understand, and now it's a big event in that little area, in that town. But it started way back there, and I can remember it as a kid.
Right.
And this was every summer we'd do this as kids. And I left home when I was a youngster. I went to study the seminary when I was about 12 years old. And then after that, I don't recall too much of in the country because I was in college after high school, and then after that I went into service, and then I was away quite a bit, and I didn't return to this area until 1958, about 58, somewhere, 57, 58. So that's my recollection of the early time in Erath. Now my sister and brother are a little older than I am. I'm sure they remember many more things than I do.
Flossie, you experienced the cotton fields also?
Oh, yeah, but we were girls. We could quit when we wanted to. So the big deal was to get the hat on and get out to the fields with my grandmother telling me that the sun was going to fry my brains if I didn't keep the hat on.
Right.
But we were girls, so we could quit, and we did.
Right.
But it was fun.
Were part of the girls' chores involve cooking for the laborers?
No. I was the oldest granddaughter. I was more or less a queen around my grandmother. Oh, yes. And my great uncle, who was a brother of my grandmother, was a sharecropper, and they had 3 girls. So we were with the girls. We just kind of just fooled around, really.
Right,
and so it was, But I couldn't wait for the last day of school so we could go to Erath, because right through my grandmother's property was a coulee. And we caught more crawfish in that coulee, and I can remember on Sundays the adults played cards. And my mother did not want us to have matches. So I'd go to my grandmother and I'd tell her, pull her dress, and she'd get up from the card table and go get me some matches and sneak them away so Mother couldn't see it. And then we'd light fires outside to cook our crawfish.
Yeah, so y'all were
Some of those biddies were little too,
Yeah.
believe me.
Yeah, so the crawfish back then were not as cultivated as they are now.
No, they were, but we caught them. Everything they had around, we'd catch. That was
Right.
a big thrill.
Yeah, how about it's tasty? You think it tastes to you today?
No,
They were back then?
Well, I don't know. I can eat my weight in it right now as well. But
Yeah.
that was a big deal on Sunday while the adults played cards, was for us to go in the coulee and catch the crawfish and then use a coffee can to boil them in. We had fun.
I'm sure the summer experience was an occasion to keep your family, your first cousins, closer together.
That's right,
That's the
yes.
time you
Well,
really
we were
saw.
always close, and as I said, I was the oldest granddaughter, so my grandmother, I was special, whether anybody else wants to believe it or not. And she would take me to church. The thing I remember about everything now, in those days, I've just had my 50th wedding anniversary, so this is way back. But they used to sell the pews in church, and everything was centered around the church, all the living. And my grandfather, I was only 6 years old when my grandfather died, but I can explicitly remember him telling me Bible stories at night before I'd go to bed, when I'd go over there at my grandmother's. But we'd go to church, and my grandmother was one of these very proud somebody, and she had the second pew from the front, and I can remember prancing up the middle aisle with her and Grandpa, and she'd get at her pew and somebody'd be sitting in the pew, and she'd clear her throat. Those people would get out of her pew, and I felt like I was a queen for sure. Grandma said, "All right, now you can go in," and we would have to sit in the second pew at church. The whole living, though, of the family was wrapped around the religion. There was no deviating from that. There was no question of missing Mass on Sunday. That you started on Saturday, getting ready to go to church on Sunday.
The primary language used on your Sunday outings and in the fields, cotton
They
fields?
were French.
French?
Oh, yes. My grandmother, DesOrmeaux, refused to even own up that she could understand English. She flat refused to speak English at all.
So you began to speak French at an
Oh,
early
yes.
age?
Well, I married a Wesley, and I couldn't even teach him how to cuss in French, so I gave up. So I don't have the experience of speaking French, but before my grandmother died, she was real indignant with me and said, "You could speak better French when you were 5 years old than you can now." But that was because I wasn't in the area.
Yeah.
We always came back for everything. A
Yeah.
Tarahumara Indian dance that Darrell might be being chairman of, we came to the dance. We never quit coming, even though we lived in Houston.
These
all
Indian
these
dances
years.
would take place at a certain time during the year? that you mentioned?
This was a different function.
Yeah,
of-
this
of
was
Fatima Church
a
here in
Fatima
Lafayette.
Church here, but that's just one of the
Reason she'd
excuses
come
we
back.
use.
Oh, I see.
We'd always come back for everything that happened here, any birthday or
Right.
anything. We've always come back from
Right.
Houston, even though we've been gone since 54. We went to Houston.
And as she mentioned, she'd come back, and every time she'd come back, she'd go and visit all the relatives
Oh,
in Erath,
yeah.
still lived in Erath and around that area. We wouldn't go just see some of our relatives.
No.
We'd have to go make the rounds when we'd go there.
Every aunt
My
and
father
uncle.
believed in us knowing everybody in the family because he knew them all. As a matter of fact, I don't think there's anybody that Daddy didn't know around Erath.
Yeah.
He knew everyone, and he saw to it we knew everyone. And so when we'd go over there to visit, we had plenty of time, and we'd go visiting different people all the time, and we got to know the family, like Darrell DesOrmeaux. I think that was my dad's uncle, his great uncle, and he lived in Erath, right across the street from the school, near the church there. And his children were about my age. His son was, or his daughter was, I think. and his son was a little bit younger. And we'd visit with them and other relatives on my mother's side. And we got to know the Primo family was married into the DesOrmeaux family. So we got to know very many families in Erath.
Oh, yeah.
As a matter of fact, we practically know everyone in Erath.
In fact, since I've been playing genealogy, I believe we're related to everybody
Really?
that's in Erath.
That's possible, huh?
It is, he mentioned Uval was Daddy's uncle. His wife was also my aunt. So Uncle Uval was my uncle and my great uncle.
Really?
So
And his wife was my mother's sister.
Yeah, and invariably the Richards and the Broussards will tie into the DesOrmeaux family until it is unreal how they're. I just have more fun than a little bit with it. As I said, I met somebody from down your section of Erath came over to Erath, and we met him in church, and she says, "My goodness, aren't you a social butterfly in Erath?" I said, "Well, I'm related to everybody out here." I said, you walk out of the church kissing cousins."
Right.
And it's just wonderful, though, how these people have stayed. I go back to the early 1800s with the DesOrmeaux and the Richards and Broussards. And my grandfather made his first communion in the church the year it opened in Delcombe. And that was 1899.
Yeah.
And the first, well, that's another story for the other one. They have one for the first marriage that happened in Delcombe were DesOrmeaux, and the second one was DesOrmeaux.
So the Delcombe Church predated the Erath
That's
Church.
right. And in fact, my mother tells of being a child of Mary, and she would go from door to door to collect 10 cents from everybody to build the church in Erath. That's how the kids would literally go from door to door out in the country and everywhere.
Our grandfather built the belfry in Erath. Stayed up there for years and years. I think it's still there, if I'm not mistaken. Still using the same belfry.
How about the bridge?
Well, the bridge.
There's a bridge on Bayou Teague that the story is for the gospel that the engineers could not figure out how to build this bridge over Bayou Teague, and they came to my grandfather, DesOrmeaux, Clobil DesOrmeaux, and they said, "You think you can build that?" My father and grandfather said that Kate was dead, and they tried everything. And so he said, "Yes, I could build that bridge." And so he literally did it. It was a swinging bridge so the boats could go through. It's still there. I have pictures of it that I did there. And this was way back in 18-something, end of the 1800s.
Mr. John, do you recall when you were younger of the sugarcane mill that was over in Erath?
Oh, yes. The sugarcane mill on the south side of Erath, so to speak. I recall that. They had big bell there to which it was rung, and when it was rung, it was to tell the hands to stop working, so to speak, and to break, eat lunch, and of course they've used it for numerous reasons. It was used for fire notification to the people. As a matter of fact, the bell is presently in front of the City Hall in Erath on exposition there with a statement of what it was used for, when it was put up, whatever. I can't recall the dates just yet. But my best recollections in that area of our little world is summer times in accordance with Darrell and Flossie. Of course, she wasn't picking cotton, I was picking cotton at a penny a pound. And we'd take it off to the cotton gin, and that was one thing. But my best recollections that I enjoyed going to my grandmother and grandfather's house was for the Saturday night dances, which Eros Gutierrez had a very large dance hall across the street from my grandmother's.
That was on which road?
That was on Highway 339, about a mile and a half from what is present-day downtown Erath. and
North of Erath.
north of Erath, rather. So anyway, I call it commotion, but the people started, dances started about 7:30, and people started getting there about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and naturally that's when the moonshine was brought out, and some of them brought their own. The 2-cent or 1-cent ice cream cone, which is who made the ice cream, and of course that's when I was allowed to go across the street to get the 1-cent ice cream cone, and then the 3-cent bottle of pop, big large RC Cola, which I don't know, I don't think they have them out today, but anyway, this was especially enjoyed, and at these functions, Saturday nights, it got sort of rambunctious about 9 o'clock, but by that time I was sitting on the front porch at my grandmother's, and we were eyeballing, me and the kids and my grandparents and sometimes my mother and father, and we just listened to a lot of the hollering going on. These people were they were getting up there, you know. At the same place, on Sunday afternoons now, they had cockfights, and they also had dog fights. Mr. Gooderhead was very well known for his dog fights. He had 4 or 5 particular dogs that were supposed to be champions in those days, and they were pretty hard to beat.
Those were pit bulls?
These are pit bulls. And I can vaguely recall that with the card games going on, they call them bulldog cards, and they claim that, I say they, the people that I can recall, that the story was that these cards came out from Mr. Eros Gutierrez's dogs.
Really?
And that's the reason why the dogs are fighting each
Really?
other on the cards, you know.
Well, I bet that brings you fond memories every time you
Well, he had a
card.
son, yes, sir. He had a son, Ned Gutierrez. He and I were roughly about the same age. He's, I think, about a year older than I was. But we were very, very friendly, and we did any and everything in the cane fields that was imaginable. The hayloft, or come across there, we'd go hunting rabbits and whatever, quails, doves.
Were you allowed to hunt rabbits at night back then?
Oh yeah, you killed anything you wanted at night. If your eyes were good enough and fast enough to get them, you could get them. There was no, of course, in those days. Now we're talking maybe about 15 or 20 people within an area of 1.5 miles from the house. Very few cattle. They had a few cattle there, but we were always pretty precautious about
Well,
how we
y'all
shot.
used to ride the fenders,
the
the front fender of the car with
rode
the
the
headlights
fenders of the
on
The
it.
car.
headlights
And they shoot
blinded
the rabbits
poor
and they didn't have a
rabbit.
Shoot them on,
chance.
well, of course, I was
They
on
shoot
the
the rabbits
road.
from the fender.
We
did that on the road.
Were there game wardens back in
Oh,
those
no.
days?
They had game wardens, but they were federal game wardens.
I think Mr.
And-
Gutierrez was one.
Well, yes, but this was mainly for the trappers. They were down hard on the trappers at the time, because there was a lot of game that the trappers were killing, and for furs and whatever, that they weren't allowed to kill and take in as possession. Your minks and whatever were pretty hard at the time. They were getting scarce. As a matter of fact, in the marshes, I think the mink population is barely nothing today. So is the muskrat, as far as that goes. But there were a lot of things that the kids could do and get away with that the kids today can't do and get away. We wouldn't think, when I'd go to Grandma's, the only way that you had the mode of transportation once the cars left was the buggy and horse. And town was a mile and a half away. And, you wanted to go there, you either walked or you saddled a horse if you could get it away from the grandparents if they thought you were old enough. And you go to town and you come back. But you wouldn't stay in town. You would come back, because you didn't want the grandparents or your parents to go look for you, because they knew where you were supposed to be. And if you weren't there, well, it was the last time you'd leave, without really seriously knowing why you can't go back again. But I had a step-grandfather, my grandmother, Richard, married a gentleman by the name of Théophile LeBlanc. I especially liked this particular thing about him. Once a month, he was a pretty much of a property owner there, and he had cattle, and he had quite a few people working for him. And in addition to his land ownership, he was a school bus driver for many, many years. But whenever he'd kill one of his animals, which were all bulls, there was only one part of the bull that was reserved for him, and this was the bull's testicles. This was the only part of the animal that he'd eat at that time. He ate it fresh, and the rest of it was given to the people that worked for him, in conjunction with the salaries and wherever they lived. It was his way of showing them that he did care for them to have fresh foods and whatever that they needed.
It was sort of like sharing the profits of
Right,
the
that is
farm
right, perfectly right.
amongst the laborers.
But there was no sharing
No,
the
no.
testicles. That was it.
That was his.
Now, Junior mentioned the sugar mill. Just in that area of Erath where the sugar mill was, and there's a little road that ran alongside of it that goes to Henry, to Boston and to Henry back there. Well, right after the sugar mill, after you make the S-curve beyond it, is where my grandfather lived and raised his family, just south of Erath.
And your great-grandfather, too.
And my
Pierre lived there.
great-grandfather also. Both of them lived there. As a matter of fact, the oak tree, the old oak tree that was there in their front yard practically, is still growing there now. And it's just to the left as you're going towards
And
Boston
it's on the
and Henry.
Broussard property.
And it's on Broussard property today. Broussard owns it.
Which I have a daughter-in-law who is a Broussard, that her father and mother lives on that property. She married my second oldest son.
I see.
See what I'm talking about? The Broussards, the DesOrmeaux,
Yeah.
the Richards, the Broussards.
Yeah.
But,
And the Primos were in there too.
Yeah.
The Primo
I have
family.
a story I
Well,
just have to tell.
Matter of fact,
we were-
we just found out tonight that my grandmother's brother, is buried in a little graveyard, and it doesn't have a marker in it. Right near there, but more to the east, to the west.
On Primo property.
On
Primo
Primo's
property.
property.
Family cemetery.
That's right.
A little family cemetery is where he's buried, and that was my grandfather's or grandmother's brother.
Mother's
Yeah.
brother.
Because my grandmother was also a DesOrmeaux.
Your grandmother's father and mother are the ones that are buried
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Right. That's right.
Vermilion Parish has a lot of family cemeteries
Oh,
scattered.
yeah.
Right. they do.
Correct. Correct.
Well, a
Certainly
lot of
has
the families
history.
had large pieces of, or mostly sections of land, which
Yeah.
is 640 acres. And at that time, 640 acres was quite a bit of land to cultivate, especially there was only 2 or 3 mules, maybe 1 or 2 plows, a disc, and whatever. And it was pretty hard for a man that didn't have too much of a large family to give him a hand. So it was, transportation was too great to be able to go any distance. The priests came to their little cemeteries that
Yeah.
they made in some place out of the way, where it wouldn't be bothered by no one, and no one would be bothered other than the family. And they've gotten away from it. A lot of the laws have changed where you can't have this anymore, no matter how much land you got.
Right.
You've got to put it in the public area.
Miss Flossie, you have any interesting
I just have to tell
recollections?
my story. That I've gotten out of the cotton fields and the coulee to a cornfield that my cousins and I were there, and this was a traumatic thing. We just meandered and we went into the cornfield, and right in the middle of this cornfield is a still.
Oh.
Now, I am about 10 years old maybe, and I don't even know what a still is. And so I said, why in the world would this be here? And so she said, oh, you can't tell anybody about this. This is a secret. So this guy in that same neighborhood had a still going, and they literally bottled it and took it to Texas and sold it there.
You also sold it at Eros Gutierrez
Dance hall.
because this was my
This
uncle
was
that she's
during
talking
Prohibition.
about.
I wasn't going to say
Well,
that.
he had it.
But
he's
I
dead
had
and
to,
gone. If
I
you
had
do
to
him
keep,
anything
I had
today.
to keep that secret for a long time. It was hard to keep that because after she told me what it was, I just couldn't believe it.
You'd
They
sell
put it
it.
right in the middle of the cornfield.
Miss
sell
Flossie,
it
did you ever
20
sip that moonshine?
Yeah, but not too much.
Good
of it.
corn liquor.
Well, I understand he made good beer too. He
Oh,
brewed
yeah,
good beer
oh,
also.
yeah.
He sold this at 50 cents a pint.
Well, I don't know how much
He'd
it was.
take 5 or 6 pints over to the dance hall, and Well, he was forever running back and forth. He lived maybe 1,000, 1,500 feet away from the dance hall. And he was going back and forth because that's all he could carry at one time. A lot of them would come to his house. And his wife, my aunt, my mother's sister, would be there, and she'd fuss at him. I can remember her fussing at him because she didn't want all that trash in her yard, she said. She never no telling what the cops are going to say, or the police. At that time, of course, it was during the Prohibition era, like you said, and it was strictly against the law to make this moonshine, you know. But he did well to supplement
and bottled beer too.
Yeah,
I mean,
beer
they
too.
Used to
To show you how popular that dance hall was, in those days they had several people. My mother told me this many times, and to this day she still thinks the people that come from there are bad people, because all she had to do is gauge it from by these people.
Right.
But they come all the way from Ville Platte.
Wow.
That's a good way to come over here to Erath in those days. But they'd come there to come to that dance and raise ruckus at night and have a good time.
Oh, yeah.
And they'd have knife fights and God knows what go on at that night after they drank all day long by the time the dance came by. And it was always the bunch from Ville Platte that was causing the trouble. So in my mother's mind, everybody from Ville Platte was no good. Because of that.
She'll be 92. She'll be 92 in November, and she still has reference to the.
No, she knew no one else from Ville Platte except them.
So she must talk.
In conjunction with what he was saying there about the fights and knife fights and one thing. Well, they always had what they call him a constable, which was a constable. And he wasn't necessarily a town policeman or constable.
He was hired.
He was hired for that dance hall. And believe you me, when he spoke, you split. If you didn't, he'd split your head open. And he wouldn't think twice about doing it. And there was never one that, to my knowledge, that ever killed anybody by accident and or brought to trial for hurting anybody. They learned their lesson when they flipped him. And that was enough.
The good old country law.
That is right. You had trouble, you paid for it.
And of course, Mother wouldn't let us go there because that, I mean, we could sit on Grandma's front porch and look at the people go in and out, but we couldn't go to the dances as children. So I got to asking her, I said, well, Mother, I said, why can't we go? Didn't you go? And she says, heavens, no. She said, I was president of the Sodality, the Children of Mary, they called it. And she said, we were not allowed to go to public dances.
She attended a convent school in New
Iberia.
But
she proceeded to tell me, I said, well, how did you ever meet Daddy? Oh, she says, well, now, I went out before your daddy. And so she proceeded to tell me how, if she didn't go to the public dances, how did it ever happen that she ever danced? And so she said, well, the people that had a nice backyard would invite the special people, the good people, to come to the parties. And I said, well, they didn't have no electricity. I said, how did you manage it? Oh, she said, that was solved. She said, they soaked rags with kerosene cans for a couple of days before, and then the day of the party, they would hook it onto a post. Oh. And then they lit it up, and then the chaperoned people would come to the dance. The chaperones all sat on one side of the fence, and they danced. The big event of the party was a cake dance. Only engaged couples or people that were going steady could dance this dance. They paid a quarter to do that. And then when the dance was over, whoever won the cake got to take it home. That was the big thrill of the evening.
Well, that's very interesting. We've certainly enjoyed having you all here. And I'm sure we could go on for hours recollecting some of the situations that arose in Erath and Vermilion Parish. I know you still visit Erath quite a bit, and I guess you saw the new museum that has just opened there. And as you know, it's part of the tracing of your genealogy and your history and your fine culture in Vermilion Parish. And thank you all for coming this evening.
Well, thank you for asking us.
Thank you for asking us.
Appreciate it.
Vermilion Parish has it all, and that's no bull.
And you know that from being gone.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being with us this evening.
Well, thank
We've
you.
enjoyed having the DesOrmeaux family on another edition of French in Vermilion Parish.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.